Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Good. How are you, Christina?
I'm good. It's good to see you. Thank you for participating in this conversation today with us regarding facility funds for early learning centers and how we can help them get developed successfully and with fidelity. This video is a part of our conversation around financing facility funds and sort of the introductory process of what you need to be thinking about as you proceed with potentially developing a new center and or expanding an existing center. So first of all, will you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Jonathan Leit with Alembic Community Development. We're a mission-driven developer that works, does a lot of affordable housing development, and then also works with various partners, both nonprofit and for-profit, who are community serving in some sense, to develop new facilities, traditionally in underserved communities.
Thank you. And how did you, so you're in New Orleans doing development, that's your focus market. How did you get engaged in the early learning center space? And how have you participated so far?
Sure. Well, I mean, on a personal level, I have two kids, and I saw the impact of them having early education, and I'd say pretty strong early education. And I know the privilege that comes with that, and I know the importance it's had for them in later years in their education and setting them up for success. And so that's certainly something that we all should advocate for and recognize. Certainly it became more on my radar, like many people, just the ecosystem for it with the 2022 millage here in the city, and how prominent that was and how encouraging it was that it had such broad-based support. I certainly was one of those people who was very happy to pull the lever for it. But I thought in general, it seemed it was just a really impressive campaign. I think a really well done one, and a very effective one, and an incredibly important one. Um, Fast forward about a year-ish later, we were fortunate to get to work with a great nonprofit partner called People's Housing Plus, and we're awarded an old city-owned firehouse on Louisiana Avenue in Central City. And this was a competitive process, and when we were thinking about potential uses for it to propose, one of the ones that we really both focused on was early education. We knew a little bit about it. We hadn't developed a specific ECE facility. We developed a school before, and so knew a little bit about some of the regulatory constraints and code and other stuff. But we didn't honestly know whether it would work well in this old building, and how we'd make that work. But we knew that it was important, and we knew that it was something that we could find the right people to help advise us on it. And so that's what we did. We started going down the road to see if this was something that could fit. And lo and behold, it would. And so we're in that process of development. And through that project, have been really fortunate to get connected to some amazing people. Obviously, already was connected to you, but you helped introduce us. I want to call that out. There's some great people, including for providers by providers, Rochelle Wilcox, and a whole bunch of other folks. And so now we feel like very invested in this space and trying to be, obviously one of thousands of people and groups who are trying to help create new facilities and all the different aspects that come with that.
So I know you're developing an early learning space in that center, and you're also, I think, supporting another early learning provider who is looking to build a brand new facility. And so from your perspective, with most early learning center providers in the city have sort of gone through the process of figuring out how to develop something by themselves, right? They've used their own funds, they've mortgaged their houses, et cetera. And we're trying to support them in figuring out other ways to finance these developments. What do you think are some of the first things that early learning providers should know about the process of like finding the funds to get your center developed? Let's say they have a spot already, they have some vacant land. Let's start with the vacant land part first. And then we can talk about like you have an existing building, right? But what do you think some of the first things our early learning center providers should be thinking about as they, try to find some money to build a new facility or expand an existing one?
Yeah. So yeah, we'll start with the vacant land. Actually, in any scenario, the thing that we always said, by technically we're real estate developers, but we think of ourselves much more broadly than that because the work we do is much broader than that. The first thing in any development, certainly when it comes to EC, is having a really solid business plan and operating budget.
Mhm.
You can't build a building, you can't finance a building without first really starting at the end and understanding what are your revenues, what are your expenses, like what is your cash flow going to look like. That is the starting point for thinking about the upfront financing, because that shows you, right, if you can support any debt, as far as can you pay debt service through operations. It's just going to need to be funded all through kind of, as you say, like friends and family, and kind of equity type sources, or there are grants and other subsidies that are needed. But none of that, building a building really matters until you have a good understanding of your operating budget. That's one. Two, obviously, kind of right sizing it, and so understanding, diligence things like you own a property. Have you done environmentals? Do you have a survey? Do you have some of the like kind of key tools that are going to be needed to even take to a lender, take to a funder? So you want to have kind of a good set of diligence that can come along with your operating budget. Scale. So is it right sized? Is it right sized not only to your own operations and your own capacity? What are you doing existing? Like, are you currently operating a 50 to 60 seat and you're going to be growing maybe to 100, or you're going to double in size? Is what kind of jump and what kind of increase of capacity is needed in order to get to a new facility? Again, not only for operating and planning purposes, but to you want to start crafting a narrative and a justification really for funders who are going to be doing underwriting, right? They're going to be underwriting you as the recipient of funds, whether you're a borrower of debt or a recipient of grant funds, other things. So they're underwriting you, and then they're going to be underwriting the project. Underwriting some other stuff too. But when it comes down to it, that's what they're looking at, right? They're looking at both you as the recipient of funds and steward of that, and then long-term operator, and then how the project itself works. Okay, so that's all for kind of context. Then you can start to network and start to talk to folks and really understand what are both some typical targets of conventional financing. With not all lenders are made alike, so all the time. You may find a lender that might offer you half a percentage point less in interest rate, but you may not want to work for that lender for 10 other reasons. And whereas there might be another lender whose money is a little bit more expensive, but is much easier to work with, a much better fit for an ECE facility borrower. There's all kinds of considerations. So I really recommend talking to a lot of people, doing a lot of networking, talking to peers, talking to folks like Agenda, talking to folks like Spoken Buy providers who can connect you to professionals in the field, even like us, who, if nothing else, can maybe point in the right direction around some different opportunities. Then there's looking at uncovering all kinds of other non-typical sources, and that's kind of what we specialize in. But again, depending on the scale of what you're doing, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there can be tax credits, there can be city, state, federal subsidies that can help you develop your building and pay for it. There can be kind of a whole, we describe kind of a kitchen sink approach where you layer in a bunch of different sources, all towards the goal of minimizing your debt. Everyone hopefully wants to see that, everyone as in on the financing side wants to see your operation be successful. And that means putting as much money as you can to paying teachers, to providing great classroom learning experiences, and minimizing your debt. I mean, debt is often necessary to get projects done, but you want to borrow as little as is necessary.
Okay, so I'm gonna summarize for folks what I think I heard you say. Step one is sort of what we in the field call due diligence, right? Which is the land you're looking at even as we call it clean for you to be able to put a building on it that can house little people, right? And so when you're talking about the environmental, that is a part of pre-development, right? So that's sort of the pre-development due diligence part of the work. I think you also talked about sort of getting a survey, right? And understanding, is the land you purchase properly zoned so that you can build the building? And if it's not, then we know there's another process that, folks can have to go through to get that done. I think what step two you said is like learning, right? This is all about sort of the initial analysis. The next thing is about learning and understanding sort of what is available to support the project you're doing. And I think the last thing was like taking those things and being able to put together the story, right? You have the land, and you understand the land and the survey, you understand what the field looks like, and now you can tell the story based on all of the things that you have learned. Would you say that that's a fair, a sort of a fair, like, narrow step way of thinking about this process?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good summary of my rambling answer. And then I'd say just the fourth one is just networking,
Right.
talking to folks and making
Yeah.
sure that you're having really some broad-based conversations and creating a lot of different options for yourself.
You mentioned the importance of sort of being able to share your vision, right? I think sometimes that
Mhm.
we miss the importance of sharing the excitement of why we want to build a building, right? Um, and that's really important when it comes to when it comes to community development projects. So, what do you think are some of the key things that an early learning center needs to be able to tell folks in their story about why they should
Mhm.
invest or, allow them to borrow for a facility?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely. I mean, when we talk about real estate development, we talk about storytelling. That's
Mm-hmm.
really its narrative impact, all that stuff. So I think there's some qualitative stuff and some quantitative stuff. On the qualitative, you want to tell who you are. Like, what is your passion? Why did you get into this? You obviously, what is your background? What is your history? What is both again at a personal level is really important, as well as then of course as a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and making the case that you're a business owner who will be effective and judicious in running your business and serving kids and serving families. Uh, Separately, there are a bunch of quantitative things, and particularly around impact. So, job creation is a huge one, right? So, is this center going to have, is it going to have how many classrooms you're going to have? How many teachers are going to be in each of those classrooms? Not only numbers, but then are they paid living wage? Are they offered benefits like healthcare, paid time off, professional development? uh, Other quantitative things, number of kids served. That's a clear one. So not only kind of size of the size of the facility, but is it a range? Is it from infants to age, 3, 4? And I know oftentimes that's in flux, but so what is your best estimate and understanding of how you're going to place different age ranges in different classrooms based off the size that you think you'll have? What are your student teacher ratios? What is your pedagogy for education? Right, like one of the key messages that I have certainly learned in being involved in this work the past year or so is making sure the message is clear. This is not daycare, and too often people think it's daycare. This is education, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's good to say that, but then backing that up with
Mm-hmm.
like literally what does a curriculum look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I thank you for that. I think sometimes I review grant applications, and I've been doing that for a while, and you know that I was an underwriter for some of our tax credit buddies. Um, I think one of the things that I noticed in folks telling the story is that sometimes they either oversimplify it, right? And they say, well, I want to build this
Mm,
building. I've been in the business for 20 years, and I've got $1 million in the bank. Well, that's lovely, right? But what's more important is sort of what is the philosophy behind why you do the work, right? And
mhm.
there's a saying that people say, a lot of times people are investing in the person first and the project second. So talking about
Absolutely.
the work you're doing and why you are the right person, and you have the capacity, right? One of the big things about capacity is, do you as a leader have the capacity to move this project forward to fruition? And history is very important in telling that story,
Mhm.
right?
And I can't say enough how important it's not only obviously the content is first and foremost, but having it be professional, well organized, edited, as you say, not don't undersell, but don't oversell, right? Like you
Mm-hmm,
don't need 20
mm-hmm,
pages,
mm-hmm,
but you need more than a
mm-hmm,
paragraph too.
mm-hmm.
So making sure that you're having other people read it, edit it. Always, what I always do is I always try to put myself in the position of the audience and the reader, and they get, funders get bombarded with, hundreds, thousands of these things. And what is going to make you stand out?
Mm-hmm.
And that's your goal, is to help tell your story with passion, but then in a concise, appropriate, powerful way so that it can stand out.
Yeah, so it's sort of like do the networking thing that we talked about earlier, right? And when you get the opportunity for them to say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you more about your project," be ready to tell your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we didn't talk about was the importance of sort of the elevator pitch. be able to tell somebody in sort of 60 seconds what you're doing, who you are, and why it is the best answer, right? I think is also something else that that's important. Jonathan, my last question for you really is, if you've been in the mix in that a little bit now, right? And you've seen sort of what's happening in the field. What are three takeaways, some, both that you think would be really crucial for a provider who's getting ready to go, like they're chomping at the bit to get started? Like, what do you think some of the, like, what's a mistake that, a big mistake that don't do that? And what's a big thing that they, you think somebody should absolutely do, like do this first, or, center yourself on that?
That is a good question. That is a great question. I think well, I'm gonna pause and think about that for a second.
Okay.
Something I may not differentiate so much between what to do and not do, but just answer like some of the takeaways. One is that try to have an appreciation for yourself and the work that you do. I think you referenced kind of underselling. In my conversations at a couple of these conferences afterwards, a couple of these providers, it's striking to me that how difficult and really impressive the work is in these facilities, and maybe not always an appreciation by the people themselves of how that can resonate with other people. It certainly resonated with us. And I think it resonates really broadly, and it cuts across, right? Like politics, and cuts across all kinds of things. And it just, again, it's really compelling. And I guess, yeah, finding that story, but I think just make sure that you're having broad conversations so that you can understand the context in which you're doing your work. And I know, I mean, we get in the grind all the time doing real estate development, and sometimes it's really hard to step back and see like the big picture. But the big picture is, I mean, some of the most impactful work that anyone is doing anywhere, and that needs to be communicated. And I think I know people are really receptive to that. And I think anyone's touching this, it's part of our job to kind of communicate that clearly and make sure. So it's just been a takeaway around, I think, how strong this ecosystem here is in New Orleans, and that make sure you don't undersell yourself. Something not to do, I mean, this is just kind of a general rule. Don't just go buy something. Don't just go buy a property. The diligence is so important, right? There's so much that can go into it. I mean, we only really even touched on zoning, but make sure you have like team. It doesn't have to be a big team, right? Like you have your advisors. You just before you spend meaningful money, you really have to kind of know what you're getting into and have a plan for what you're getting into. Development is so not A to Z, right? There's twists and turns. Just when you think you've gotten one thing solved, right, something else will pick back up. It's really kind of circular. We say iterative a lot of times, but what you have to do is manage minimal or incomplete, imperfect information as best as you can. And that means collecting as much as you can along the way. So it can be a tough ride, and you really, before you start spending, again, your hard-earned money that can sometimes be hard to get back, you just really want to do as much diligence as possible up front.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jonathan, thank you for your time, and I will end this with just saying, when we are in the field doing work, sometimes it's hard for us to pick our heads up and tell our story. And that early learning facilities not only impact little people, right, but they impact economic development in communities. They're tied to community development, of course, and all those things are aligned with each other, even though sometimes we talk about them separately. So thank you for helping us figure out like how we start to assemble our package and get ready for taking them to the market and building new facilities. And I will end this interview now.
Happy to do it.